Now the river was low and the boat wouldn't go, so we took out the you-know. Now Sally's first rate and she leads with the 8, but I can't follow suit. The cards come my way, but Joe reverses the play. I could be here for days. Then Fred shrieks, "I win," with a smart aleck grin and says, "It's only a game, Dad."
Uno truly is a staple family game, but this means that it's riddled with house rules. When you sit down to play with a new group of people, you never quite know what version of Uno you're going to be playing. Will you be able to stack draw 2s and draw 4s? How many times can they stack? Can you pick up, put down? If you forget to say Uno when you have one card left, how steep will the penalty be? These and many more questions will fill your mind. If you're not a tabletop connoisseur, you might be wondering, why do people bother with all these house rules when Uno comes with a detailed rule set? Well, house rules pop up because the original rules require reading. And lots of reading. In reality, games like Uno follow an oral tradition, where families pass down their own rule sets at the moment of play, typically to the benefit of whoever hates losing the most. But the problem with house rules is the inconsistency. As I noted earlier, you never know what version you're going to be playing. But lucky for the wider Uno community, we at Dundas have rigorously compiled Uno house rules over many years in hopes of delivering a definitive Uno version to be played around the world.
We're ready to morph into action! 6 working together to fight evil! And stop Rita and all her menacing monsters!
From destroying our planet Earth and ruling the universe with evil!
Look out, Rita! We're not backing down! We're the Power Rangers!
And thus, I would like to introduce Ultimate House Rules Uno. Here is what it looks like. Oh, sorry, a couple of little disclaimers before we get into the breakdown of the rules. Ultimate House Rules Uno is completely merciless. If normal Uno tests friendships, Ultimate House Rules Uno creates lifelong enemies. So please play at your own peril. Also, slightly more normal disclaimer. This explanation comes with the assumption that you already know the rules of base Uno. If you don't, whip out a rulebook, give it a read, and then come back. It won't be covered again here. And so, without further ado, let's get into the rules. On top of the base game, Ultimate House Rules Uno adds tweaks to 4 areas. 1. Special abilities for 0 and 7 cards. 2. Mechanics around draw 2, draw 4, skip and reverse. 3. Point scoring at the end of each round. And 4. Miscellaneous rules. So first up, special abilities for 0 and 7 cards. If you are an Uno aficionado, you might have heard of special rules for 0 and 7 cards. We've decided to incorporate these into the Ultimate House Rules Uno rule set. When you play a 0 card, everyone gives their hands to the next person in play order. When you play a 7 card, you choose a person to swap hands with. In both cases, if you end up receiving a hand with only 1 card left, don't forget to say Uno because you can still face a penalty. And then there's the mechanics around draw 2, draw 4, skip and reverse. Or another way of explaining this is how we added true player combat into the simple game of Uno.
Sorry to disappoint you, Yuki. You triggered my trap card!
In many versions of Uno, a draw 2 can be played on someone else's draw 2 to make the next person pick up 4 cards. Then, another person can play a draw 2 to make the next person pick up 6, and this can continue on forever. This is an excellent mechanic, so of course we are keeping it. In some versions of Uno, a draw 4 can be played on a draw 2 or a draw 4 to make the next person pick up 6 or 8 cards. We've included this rule too. In most versions of Uno, a draw 2 can't be played on a draw 4. But in our version, it can, under certain conditions. Basically, when a draw 4 is played, that player gets to decide what color is going to be changed to. In Ultimate House Rules Uno, the victim of the draw 4 does not have to pick up cards until after the draw 4 player has selected a colour. You might be wondering why. Well, this is because if the victim has a draw 2 of the same colour, they can play a draw 2 instead of picking up, and the chain continues. But it does not stop there. In the exact same scenario, the victim can also avoid picking up the cards by A. Playing a draw 4 as explained above, B. Playing a same colour skip. This means that the next person picks up the cards instead, unless they also have a defensive option, or C. Playing a same colour reverse. This actually means that the draw 4 player picks up the cards, unless they have a defensive option. And now we move on to point scoring at the end of each round, another area where we have drastically changed the game. Did you know that in the official rules of Uno, the game is meant to be played across multiple rounds with point scoring? In the original version, the player who wins the round counts up the numeric value of every card that other players had left. The sum total is their point score, and the first player to get to 500 points wins. Here is how the numeric value breaks down for the non-numeric cards. Skips, reverses, draw 2s are all worth 20 points. Draw 4s, wilds, both worth 50 points. We thought this was pretty silly because you would only really enjoy the game if you won the previous round, and with Ultimate House rules, Uno rules, winning is almost impossible to control, so we have gone for golf style rules, where you simply try and keep the point score in your hand as low as possible. Winning is great, sure, but ending around with 2 1s, or 1 2, or any sort of combination of low value cards, it's almost as good. To win Ultimate House Rules Uno, you must have the lowest point score across 3 rounds, or you can play 5 rounds if you want to play a bit of a longer game. Quick side note here, you should also keep track of the person who has the highest score across the rounds. It can be interesting to see how much a single player can get bullied by game mechanics. The highest score we've seen from an individual player in a single round is 231. See if you can beat that. And finally we move on to some quick-fire miscellaneous rules. Firstly, if you forget to say Uno when you have 1 card left, you must pick up 7 additional cards. If you don't have any cards to play on your turn, you only have to pick up 1 card. You're also, controversially, allowed to pick up put down. If you play a 0 or 7 as your last card, now this is a very important rule, if you play a 0 or 7 as your last card, you do not win the round. Instead, the person who receives your empty hand through the exchange rules wins instead. So yeah, have fun with that one. And finally, Ultimate House Rules Uno is best played with 6+ players and multiple decks combined. This is because the drawing mechanics may lead to some rather large hands. Also, alcohol may be recommended to help soothe the damaged egos of large-handed players. It worked for us, could work for you. For some final thoughts, you might be asking yourself why Ultimate House Rules Uno is necessary when rule clarification could always be sought from the original Uno creators. Well, it is necessary because the Uno team doesn't really know what they're talking about. According to the self-proclaimed @real Uno game, draw 2s and draw 4s can't even be stacked. Such a ruling is just sad. It shows a lack of vision, of imagination, of bravery. So use our rule set instead. The PDF guide for the rules, in much more succinct format than this video, is downloadable in the description. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.